Hey, is this on? I'm guessing no. Hey, folks, is this on? Hello, hello. Hmm. Maybe it's. Does it seem like it's on though? Okay, okay. Hey, Melissa, the mic's a little low. The mic's a little low. Does the or does that seem okay? Hello. Does that seem okay? Okay. To louder it. I had a blueberry muffin for breakfast. You know that I don't drink coffee. I know, I got that, but so is it, does it? Okay. What? Do you want? You should start here, yeah, because I'm not gonna be long. Hi, Dale. Nice to see you. That's my hug motion. Good morning, everyone. Can folks hear me okay? Nobody answered. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we will get started. First of all, happy Climate Week. I'm not sure if that's something we're happy about. We're happy that people are talking about how to protect the climate. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Ann Reynolds. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Alliance for Clean Energy of New York. We are a member-based organization with a mission to promote the clean energy industry in New York State, and we are so pleased to have planned this event with our friends at E2, Environmental Entrepreneurs, New Yorkers for Clean Power, Natural Resources Defense Council, and new this year, Downtown Brooklyn and the Urban Future Lab. So a particular thank you to our planning committee, which is Uchena, Betta, Bryn, Deb, Jean, and Mel. So all raise your hands. We'll clap for them. Thank you. So this is the 6th year, believe it or not, that ACE, NYCP, E2, and NRDC have jointly planned this event. And originally, we simply wanted to convene a group to take a deep dive on a single timely issue over breakfast during Climate Week New York City, because there were so many interesting and interested people in the city this week, and also because we like getting together. The first 3 years, this event focused first on the voluntary market for renewable energy development, and then on access of low and moderate income folks to the coming clean energy revolution, and then on the emerging offshore wind industry. And then, undaunted by a worldwide pandemic, our event went online for 2 years, and we focused on electric vehicle deployment 1 year and on offshore wind and its ability to create new jobs in the second year. That was in 2021. But We are so pleased to be back in person this year, but also to be online, and we have an all-time high level of participation. Over 280 people registered to listen in on this event online, which we were pleased about because we deliberately wanted to limit the size of the folks in the room. But alas, some things do change, and instead of breakfast, we are having lunch. The planning committee agreed that New Yorkers just don't get up as early as they used to. We spent a long time discussing that. And speaking of the planning committee that I mentioned, it's a really great group of people, and we take our time coming up with the event topic and with the event title. And the title of this year's event, as you know, is Efficiency plus Electrification plus Affordability, the recipe for equitable, climate-friendly buildings. And yes, I know it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but rest assured, we did think about it a lot. We collectively feel an urgency to take action to protect the climate, and we all know, again collectively, that that action must include changing our buildings, and doing so quickly. So through today's panel discussion, we wanted to encapsulate that it can't be electrification or efficiency for buildings, and it can't be rapid action or equity, and it can't be affordable housing or climate-friendly housing. The recipe for success, in our view, has to involve all three: efficiency, electrification, and affordability. And that is a challenge. That's our challenge. And it's happening at the same time as we face a serious housing challenge, and perhaps that can be an opportunity for us. So we have a lot to talk about. To get us started, I'm thrilled to introduce Chair Rory of the New York State Public Service Commission. He is an engineer by training and now oversees and directs what could be one of the most powerful and flexible public service commissions in the United States, given the breadth of New York's public service law, covering electricity issues broadly, but also the gas system, water system, even broadband. He comes to that position with a wealth of experience in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors, notably for this topic with the New York City Housing Authority as its Director of Energy, Finance, and Sustainability, but also previous jobs at Keyspan, Exelon, and the Environmental Defense Fund. We are so grateful that he was willing to step up to this role at such a critical time in New York's clean energy transition. We hope he doesn't regret it. Thank you so much for taking on this position and for joining us today. But before I turn it over to Chair Christian, I do have one housekeeping item. For questions after the panel, we're going to collect index cards. So if you have a question, please jot that down. Did everybody get index cards? Oh, Shayna's about to pass them out. Please jot that down and either pass it to the end of the row or just wave it in the air, and someone will come get it for you, from you. It's a low-tech approach, but it works. And also for those of you online, you can put your questions in chat, and we will deliver them by index card up to the stage. So think of your questions now and just write those down for us. And so now I'll turn it over to Chair Christian. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's always the worst part of the event. All right. So I want to thank you all for coming and expressing interest in this topic. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment of silence for our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico recovering from the most recent hurricane. Want us to think about what they're going through and how our actions can help New York avoid a similar fate in the future. So just take a moment to think about that. And now, with that in mind, I want to start with a question. How do you prepare for a once-in-a-century storm? When I started working in the energy sector, there was a simple practice that I soon learned every utility followed, and it was simply this. The storm came, you sent people out after it was over to look at what happened, and you fixed everything. And if it was too much for you as a single utility to repair, you brought in neighboring utilities to help out. And when you look back, major storms of the 70s and 80s, what you had were a week or two of outages in some cases for storms that were severe, but not as severe as the storms we're facing today. The approach worked then, but what we need today will require a different way of thinking, and that's in part because of climate change. How do we prepare when a once-in-a-century storm becomes commonplace? What do you do differently to minimize the damage and then to recover faster? Part of the solution we here in New York have been pursuing has been building a more robust electric distribution system, a more robust energy system. Part of that involves renewable energy, smarter distribution of that energy, more robust transmission, but also buildings, which is what we're here to discuss today. So 5 years ago, our countrymen in Puerto Rico were faced with a rapid succession of major hurricanes. Hurricane Irma followed just 2 weeks later by Hurricane Maria. And one of the things I caught on very quickly when reading about this most recent hurricane, that particular distinction seems to have been lost. Everybody remembers Hurricane Maria, but no one remembers that Irma came just 2 weeks prior and set the path for what would happen through Maria. And when we think about storms in New York, we always think about Sandy. That's the gold standard of what could happen. But we also forget about a similar 1-2 punch of storms we faced. Tropical Storm Lee, which was quickly followed 2 weeks later by Tropical Storm Irene. Now, these storms did not affect New York City, but I tell you, everybody in the capital region remembers them vividly. All right, there we go. And the floodwaters left an indelible mark on the communities there that many areas have yet to recover from. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, Sandy, Irene, and that other storm, they all happened within a year of each other. 100-year storms, 3 in a year. So I could spend the next hour going over other examples like this. We could talk about what's going on in Pakistan right now and the devastating effects of floodwaters there. We could talk about the heat waves in India and the Middle East. And I'm sure as you attend other Climate Week events, you'll likely hear of these incidents from other speakers. But the simple, undisputable fact is that yesterday's extreme weather events are fast becoming, if not already, today's commonplace weather. Whether it be a significant isolated incident or a cascade of smaller incidents, we must think differently about how we prepare, and we must use all the resources available to ensure that we can continue with our conveniences and necessities of modern day living. Now, here in New York State, under the leadership of Governor Hochul, we've taken several actions to prepare for that future. We've taken steps to harden our energy systems, making them less vulnerable to an evolving set of threats, while also making them more flexible, more adaptable, and easier to adjust to real-time conditions. Integral to these efforts is a recognition that we must shift our energy use away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy solutions, a shift now enshrined into state law through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, known as the CLCPA, for those of you in the know. Integral to that is a recognition that statewide renewable energy procurement will need to be 70% renewable energy by 2030. Now, when I first heard that number many years ago, I thought, that's impossible, we'll never get there. But truth be told, when we look at the generation assets we have in place today, and we look at what we've recently purchased through offshore wind procurements, through our recent Tier 4 procurement to bring renewable energy to New York City, by 2030, we are already on pace to hit 66% with what we already have secured. And we have a lot more purchasing to do over the next few years. So we're right on the doorstep of 70%. We've also made commitments to bring online 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. And for those of you unaware, take a look at NYSERDA's website. That procurement is active and open and available for review. Our state partner NYSERDA is also helping to stay at the forefront of technology by exploring options for alternative fuels such as RNG and hydrogen, and the deployment of long-duration battery storage solutions. solutions that are going to be integral to ensuring that our grid can remain reliable and provide us an equivalent level of service that we've all come accustomed to. We've also taken significant steps with transmission planning efforts, which are underway to identify near-term needs and prioritize them along with long-term opportunities. These actions, along with many others, put us within range of the 70 by 30 renewable energy goal and establish a pathway for achieving the 100% clean energy goal by 2040, which, by the way, is also codified into law. But while we adapt our energy systems to allow for us to manage rapidly evolving conditions, how we use that energy needs to evolve as well. And that's where our focus on buildings comes into play. Our buildings, they need to adapt as well. Now, the building we're in happens to be a fairly efficient one. You probably noticed the scorecard out front. It's to my great displeasure that my building is a D. Can you imagine how embarrassing that is? And my child, every time we walked in, would point out, how come we have a D? Why is that a D? And so I'm working with my building to help us bump that grade up a bit. So City of New York, we're doing it. So you folk here. So this adaptation that we need to move forward with not only will benefit building owners and occupants, but it's going to benefit everybody on the grid as well. The ability to better manage the energy that we use lowers costs for everyone, because much of the cost we incur for the energy that we use is based on the need to satisfy our needs when they are greatest, something that many of you know as peak demand. If we can lower the peak, and if we can manage the energy used in that period of time, we can lower costs for everyone. And buildings that are engaged in doing so will be at a critical advantage compared to those that are not. So I like to talk about hypotheticals, right? What are we working towards? So I'll give you a couple examples. I want you all to close your eyes for a moment and imagine a future where we actually pay you or your building to use less energy or to use that energy more efficiently, or potentially to shift when you use that energy from that peak period I just mentioned to off-peak periods. Imagine that, getting paid to do that rather than paying a bill every month. Nor imagine a future where you can buy renewable energy for your home from a provider built just for your community. Wouldn't that be great? Or imagine a future where your EV could put power back onto the grid. And instead of paying to park, and for those of you who drove here know that's a pain in this area, you could be paid to park in a particular spot if you had an EV that could plug back into the grid. Just imagine that. Or imagine a scenario where you receive real-time information on how much energy your home uses. Wouldn't that be great to know that that kid of yours is using all that electricity between midnight and 2 a.m.? Well, the thing is, about all these scenarios, you don't actually need to imagine it. They're all happening right now. And I've had the good pleasure in this role of meeting all the innovators and technology providers who have been providing these services and developing the resources to do so. And a lot of this is in the wake of what has been over a decade of work from advocates, from the Public Service Commission, from our partners in the City of New York, and other state agencies in bringing forth a recognition of the need to move in this direction and make change a reality. So, while we prepare for the extreme events yet to come, we've laid the groundwork for a future where our relationship with energy can be for the better of all of us. A future where customers can take actions that benefit not just themselves but the grid as a whole and be compensated adequately for those actions. So instead of being viewed as a burden or a monthly bill, customers will be viewed as an asset, something that gives back, something that helps with the overall health and well-being of the grid as large. These features can help customers lower their bills, support the clean energy future, and keep everyone's rates lower. Again, I cannot emphasize that point enough. Much of the work done by the Commission over the last few years has been to prepare New York for this future, a future that's rapidly becoming a reality. And our emphasis on buildings is critically important because buildings as I'm sure you all know, use more than half of all the energy in New York City. And most of that energy is used for providing heat and hot water, which is usually done in the form of natural gas. So a resilient building is an efficient building. A resilient building can better withstand future storms. So not only can it perform better in the worst of times, but it can also perform better during the best of times. So when coupled with the flexibility, adaptability, and robustness of the energy system we're building, these buildings can play an entirely different role than they have in the past. And when I say buildings, I mean you. So our panel today, represented by a group of energy leaders that I've had the pleasure of knowing for a good chunk of my career, and some of whom every time I meet seem to get promoted to new roles. They all live and work right here in New York City. And they're going to give you a much better overview of how we're going to be leveraging these opportunities to make a better and brighter future for everyone. So as the state moves forward with these macro level activities, know that each and every building can play a role, will play a role. And this won't be because it's a good thing to do or the right thing to do, but we'll be putting the financial incentives to make sure that it's in everyone's best interest. So with that, I want to thank you for coming today, and looking forward to the panel. And I think questions.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Where's our card collectors? Everyone's got to get a moment to think here about questions. We still have time to ask questions.
Why don't I ask a couple of questions? How about that? Show of hands, please. I ask these questions often when I do events. How many people in this room have an EV? Oh, okay, all right. Well, this audience self-selects, so that's a biased question. All right. How many people in this room who don't have an EV want to buy an EV? All right, that's really good. Okay, that's great. Okay. How many people have solar on their roofs or the roof of an immediate family member? Raise your hands. Okay, again, biased group. Okay. So I asked these two questions at an event earlier this week, Monday, actually. It was an event of engineering companies from New York and New Jersey. And I got to tell you, nobody raised their hands. I was shocked and surprised. But then again, we were in a far-off place, so maybe there was a bit of range anxiety. But the future that we're building towards is one where all of these things will play a benefit, not just for the individuals themselves, but for the grid as a whole, right? The change we're looking at isn't going to just come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up in all directions as well. And on my final question for the group, does anybody have a smartphone? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. 20 years ago, very few hands would have been raised. So that is the power of what consumers can do when there's an interesting product and there's a self-interested motivation behind it. And that's the driver of much of what we're trying to accomplish through state policy, making sure that this is something that's of interest and available. Two questions. Okay. I'm not asking that one. All right. Well, actually, I will answer this one. Where are people getting paid to park their EVs and charge the grid? That is a great question. So I'm not a lawyer, but I need to pretend to be one from time to time. The technology is out there. There are a number of companies that provide charging infrastructure that allow you to charge back into the grid. For a variety of reasons, I cannot mention the names, but if you Google's a powerful vehicle, you can use that to check it out. But this technology works with a certain type of EV or EVs that have the ability to put power back on the grid. So if you owned an EV and you had this particular charger, you could plug in and provide services back to the grid. Or if, say, in the future, a parking lot provider, like the guys next door down the block, decided to install this charger, they could advertise outside, have an EV, park here for free between noon and 5 p.m. And that's their way of monetizing the value of your vehicle and giving you a service in return. So the technology exists. We just need to make sure the people are aware of it and can utilize it. So the next question, this looks like several questions. Why is the PSC going to reduce the solar Sorry, who wrote this? Why is the PSC going to reduce the solar incentives in virtually anyone? I can't. That's a great question. And you can blame my predecessor, who's sitting right there, um, for that action. But on a more serious note, no, I understand the concern and the frustration. And you know, one of the things to keep in mind when thinking about program design from the Commission's perspective, we want to develop these industries. We want to get them started. And we've spent a great deal of time, energy, and money doing just that. But money is a scarce resource. And with the passage of the IRA and incoming federal subsidies becoming available, we're looking at everything that we can do to better allocate the resources that we have. So I can't speak to this specific one, but what I can tell you is we're looking at all our incentives all the time, and we make adjustments to those programs on an ongoing basis to take into account other actions either from states or federally, and also with the advancements of technology and cost reductions through various things. We want to have programs that are stable as possible to give businesses and investors line of sight into what's happening. But periodically there will be changes. And right now we're going through a program review examining all our incentive programs. So everything from what we do for lighting incentives to heat pumps and other major technology. And we're trying to make sure that they're right-sized for where we want to go in the future. So, and I got one more. Oh, two more. Okay. Can I?
Sure. Actually, I don't know what time it is, so.
Oh, here's a great one. Okay, how can renters in New York City help in the transition to clean energy and electric equipment outside of asking their landlords? This is an amazing question because I live this. Here's what you do. Look at your light bulbs. If they're incandescent or CFL, you should consider changing them to LEDs. That's a first step. And case in point, when I moved into my home, my wife knows this story. Hi. Our electric bill the first month was $170-something odd. I've never paid that much for electricity in my entire life, and I was curious as to why that was. And all I needed to do was look at the lights. We had 100-watt halogen bulbs, dozen of them. So I changed those bulbs to 10-watt LEDs, and our bill dropped tremendously through that single change. So that's one thing you can do. Lighting is the easiest thing. Change your bulbs, and you can take those with you when you move out, I'm pretty sure. Next thing you can do, be conscientious of drafts. I know New York City buildings have a variety of quality and craftsmanship. I've lived in buildings where literally the air conditioner hole was wide open and I had to stuff a pillow in it to keep the air from coming in. But the tighter you can keep your home, the fewer the drafts you have, the more comfortable it's going to be for you. And ultimately, you're going to be using less heat in the building. That said, you probably also want to talk to your landlord about making sure the heat is set right. I know many buildings in New York City are overheated, and that's another concern. So talking to your landlord about that is another thing you can do. Another thing you could keep in mind, be conscientious about how and when you use your energy. Do you have all your appliances on at one time? Do you need to have all your appliances all at one time? Do you have a power strip that you can turn off when you go on extended trips? Lots of things can be done, and there are resources throughout the city that one can explore. We have information on the Public Service Commission's website. The Public Utility Law Project has information on what you can do to be more efficient. And local here to New York City, one example is Building Energy Exchange. They have a plethora of information on how you can be more efficient, both as a renter and a landlord. So lots of information out there, and you know, it's always a good idea to be as efficient in your home, no matter what your situation may be. And then last question. How do advocates help you regulate for change? This is number 2. I'll answer that first. Advocates help us regulate for, so I was an advocate prior to taking this job, so this is a very interesting question for me. Advocates provide information. They provide insight and perspective that we as regulators may or may not have. At the end of the day, we want to hear the voices of everyone. We know the actions we take will affect everybody in this room in one way or another, either in the form of energy you use or what you pay for it or the accessibility of that energy. So we want to hear feedback. In fact, later today, I will be going to a public statement hearing to hear feedback on one of the major projects that we're currently deliberating. So advocates can help us understand different perspectives, understand different options and what those options may mean, and consider different approaches to what we're doing. And case in point, something I'm sure one of our speakers is going to be talking about, one advocate many years ago helped completely rethink how we approach infrastructure investments in the state. Before, if there was a critical need and we needed to put in a bigger transformer or a bigger substation, the utilities would simply do that. Through advocates, we found an entirely different approach where instead of spending billions of dollars on investments in hard infrastructure, we invested in the communities themselves. We made those communities more efficient and reducing their energy use, thus eliminating the need for those billions of dollars of upgrade. That was something that had never been done before, and that was something that advocates brought to our attention. So they're very helpful, and we want to hear the voices. And then finally, what do you think the best opportunities are for increasing equity in the building sector? Okay. I think Sadie is probably going to be the best person to answer that question. However, I think from an equity perspective, if you're talking about ownership, I don't know how to answer this question. It's not an energy-specific question to whoever asked, but I'd be curious to hear what Sadie would have to say about this later. All right. So thank you, everyone, for your time and your questions, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay. We are now going to have our panelists come on up here. Actually, while they're doing that, I can't resist going off script since you mentioned Puerto Rico. My son worked in Puerto Rico last year doing solar installations with a microgrid in the mountainous areas, and we've been in touch with them this week to find out that the systems they installed with storage have been working. They were installed at the homes of 10 people with a medical need for electricity, and the same organization distributed 1,000 solar lanterns to the community over the last 3 days so that people would have light at home at night at least. So it's been good work that they're doing, but it's such a small fraction of the overall population there. That was a side note. So as often happens, we had a last-minute change to the program, and our great friend Dale Bryk has stepped up to serve as moderator. Dale is a lawyer by training and is currently the Senior Fellow for Energy and Environment at the Regional Plan Association, working to involve stakeholders in the design of a decarbonized regional economy. And before that, she served as New York Deputy Secretary for Energy and the Environment, a daunting job, and before that at NRDC for many successful and storied years, and as well as moderating, Dale will introduce our panelists. So please give her a welcome, and thanks so much for stepping in to do this.
So our mission today is to better understand what a just and orderly transition really looks like to get to the clean, equitable, climate-friendly, carbon-free buildings, especially in the communities that have been overburdened with pollution and underserved with clean energy solutions, and to explore really the full suite of policies, programs, and actions that we can all take that are underway to get there, and to really get a sense of the state of play. Where are we in that transition, and what's going on right now from greatest trio we could have talking about this. Plus, I think we're going to get Rory back as well. So I'll start by introducing everyone, and please read the full biographies of people that are in the materials, because it's good to understand the backgrounds here. But I'll just say I'm going to start with Sadie, the president of the Community Preservation Corporation, which is the largest community development financial institution in the nation, maybe the world, devoted to affordable housing. And Sadie is really one of the greatest thought leaders that we have on how to create more and better affordable housing. And as Anne and Rory were saying, like, these things are not in conflict. We can do both. And she knows the whole world of affordable housing finance inside out. And of course, finance is one of the sharpest tools we have in our toolbox, and has led the charge on figuring out how to finance energy efficiency, high-performing buildings, and now electric buildings and carbon-free. So thank you so much for coming, and looking forward to your comments on this. We have Gregory Elcock, the Vice President for Energy Efficiency and Distributed Resources at Con Ed. And of course, Con Ed's our hometown utility, fourth largest in the nation. And I will say one of only 2 investor-owned utilities in the country that has truly embraced electrification policies. So big shout out for you guys for doing that. That is really a brave and essential move, and I can't wait till your peers follow your lead. Gregory's been a leader in energy efficiency and clean energy for over 20 years at Con Ed, leading efficiency, all the efficiency work, now electrification of both transportation and heating, as well as distributed resources. So really at the center of the implementation of the CLCPA, our climate law here in New York. And we have Bomee Jung, who is now this co-CEO of Cadence OneFive, where she's developed software products to help, I'm going to get this right, accelerate climate responsive construction of buildings. So I'm really looking forward to understanding more what that is. Prior to launching her company, Bomee led the development of the Green Communities Criteria at Enterprise Community Partners, and also their post-Sandy resilience work. But she might be best well known for her work as the inaugural Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at NYCHA, where she developed the leading sustainability strategy for public housing, and literally wrote the book on how to electrify NYCHA homes, along with our distinguished chair, who I think will also return to talk about that more. So, so let's jump right into it. I'll just set the stage by saying, you know, here in New York, we have the CLCPA, we have our mandates to decarbonize really the entire economy, 85% by 2050. And we have some specifics on the power sector side. Rory mentioned them. You know, we're going to have 70% renewables or more, 100% net zero carbon electricity. And we know we can't meet the 85% without doing every sector of the economy, but we don't really have that much detail, or really any detail from the legislation on what that means in real life for buildings. We also have from the CLCPA, oh, thank you, I'm not turned on. But you
guys can hear me, but there's 200 other people. Thank you. We also have, I think we can credit the CLCPA with putting the number 40% on the map, and that's the requirement that 40% of the benefits of this transition to clean energy accrue to disadvantaged communities. And now that's a thing. You know, that's just a basic requirement that we're seeing all over the place, but we still haven't fleshed out what that means in real life. So I hope we can get into that piece as well. And of course, in the city, we have Local Law 97. Buildings have mandates to reduce carbon pollution. We have the law that we just passed the end of last year mandating all electric new construction going forward. So we'll see where that goes at the state level and beyond. But we have a lot of the framework in place. But we still need to understand, like, how are we going to get here, get to where we're going from where we are now, and how do we go down this road towards this world of, you know, excellent and climate-friendly buildings. So I'm just going to start by asking each of you to tell more about what you're doing in this universe, what you're working on now, where you see the biggest opportunities and challenges, and maybe what success looks like from your vantage point. And Sadie, again, I'm going to start with you. I know you guys had a big announcement this week, so maybe you want to tell us more. That could be one of the things that your highlight for us.
Thanks, Dale. Can everybody can hear me, right? Cool. Okay. So first, I just want to shout out the acknowledgement that energy efficiency and affordability go together, and that it can be you can have climate-friendly and affordable housing. At CPC, very briefly, we've been around since the 1970s, and we've been creating more energy-efficient housing since the 1970s. In the form of moderate renovation of existing buildings. We just never thought of it as providing additional energy efficiency because it wasn't a thing. But the actual practice of doing what we're all focused on doing now has been going on for a really long time. And that is inherently creating more affordability in housing and a better and healthier living environment. A bunch of things happened over the years at CPC that we were responsive to. The first, to Rory's comments, was a flood that happened in upstate New York, and we responded to a government call of action to deploy capital to help buildings recover. And so all of a sudden, affordability included resiliency, and it included what do we need to do when we're doing deals going forward to think about whether they are storm resistant, because storms and water create mold and all kinds of other unhealthy things. And then healthy housing became a big thing. Enterprise did all of their work around green communities. And then, of course, Sandy hit, CPC stepped up, and that became a whole broader conversation around housing quality. And CPC in 2008 really started working on energy efficiency because of the recession. Energy costs, oil was $150 a barrel. I think it peaked in 2008. And there was a huge recession. And so the people that we represent, primarily smaller owners in neighborhoods and communities and people that own affordable housing, they didn't have the luxury of the certainty that rents would keep rising because of the recession. So we addressed the expense side of the equation and said, let's make buildings more energy efficient, which would help on the expense side, keep costs down, and keep affordability in place. That quickly became deep energy efficiency. Great, okay, we can get on board with that. Then it became passive house. All right, I figured out what a passive house was. I brought that to all of my housing audiences, and I said, go further, drive deeper, you can do passive. All of a sudden, I turned around, and it was electrification. And it was, it's been one thing after another, and that's because of what Rory referenced also. The climate has changed significantly even since 2001. When there were maybe 1 or 3 major storms a year, and just in 2021 there were 20, right? And so that has created awareness. We don't have a Madison Avenue campaign driving awareness around energy efficiency and electrification or climate, but Mother Nature is helping us with that, right? And so there's all of these things keep happening, and it keeps, and the government has started to really prioritize that. Our work at CPC is often in conjunction with government, so we support what they support. And in New York, that means we support electrification, we support decarbonization, and we very much focus on the environmental justice that needs to be considered and elevated as we transition to a clean energy economy. And to the question about advocates, shout out to the environmental justice advocates. You are loud and proud, and you are the ones that got 40% of all of the resources in the CLCPA and now the IRA to focus on disadvantaged communities. So we keep our eye on the ball, we keep moving forward, and most recent, all of the work that we've been doing, integrating, we believe very strongly that all of this work should just happen in the normal course of private capital. We shouldn't rely on incentives. Thank you for lots of your incentives, though, Greg. We need to integrate it into our everyday business practices and into our first mortgages. That's what we do at CPC. And because of all the work that we've done, we participated on the Climate Action Council. I am now on the board of NYSERDA, as well as the board of the State Housing Finance Agency, which is a beautiful marriage of the need to create resilient and affordable housing together. We were just named yesterday it was announced, the administrator of a $250 million fund that HCR is put out to electrify existing buildings over the next 4 years. And shout out to the governor, Governor Hochul, who announced this back in earlier this year in her housing plan. And here it is, $250 million of grant money for buildings 5 to 50 units located in disadvantaged communities or regulated as affordable housing. It will be a laboratory for how we do this. CPC is not going to do it alone. We've reached out to our lending partners, other CDFIs in the space, community partners, the people that we know and that we recognize have been on the ground pushing for this, driving this. Through those organizations and entities, we can push information out, we can drive awareness, because the reality is, from our perspective, this is not CPC's job, it's not NYSERDA's job, HFA's job, or the PSC's job. This is everyone's job. Right? And so when you ask the question, what can a tenant do? It's everything. It is how you behave, what you buy, what you use, what you decide to do, how you decide to do it. We all need to consider climate in everything we do. Can't leave it just to the organizations or to the government. It is a collective. So with the Climate Friendly Homes program, we will put out grant money for 10,000 units to become all electric. We will focus on buildings that are already in good condition and that are energy efficient to make it easier, but that will be the first wave of really animating the market, teaching us all how this can be done, so that when the IRA comes in, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a ton of money in it for climate, we'll be ready to really deploy that capital to create more transformational change in our capital markets, as well as in our government systems, as well as in all of our technical friends who are driving towards all of these wonderful streamlined solutions that Rory messaged. Our goal is to bring all of that together and try to use that program as a pilot for how to do it comprehensively and do it in a just way.
Excellent. Thank you. Gregory, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Everybody can hear me? Am I clear on here? All right. So, it's a lot, Sadie. All of that. So, I think most folks know Con Ed as your friendly neighborhood utility, bringing gas, steam, and electric to power your homes. But very specifically, where I sit with teams that run our energy efficiency programs, or e-mobility programs, or demand response programs, all the things that Rory spoke about earlier on, and then thinking about how we help our customers execute on their solar and storage ambitions or responsibilities. Or so we have, I think at this point, an entire suite of activities, treatments, interventions that help customers along all of those trend lines that I just spoke about. So think, for example, from this building getting an A, right? Where did that data come from? Fortunately or unfortunately, and some folks may understand why I'm saying that, that data comes from the group that I'm in. You either, right? So if the data is good, I'll take a thumbs up. If not, I'll blame somebody else on the team. Right? Your EV charging stations that you see popping up all over, whether they be private or public, right? Bringing the power to that. I assume this building probably participates in some sort of demand response program, so helping with those issues as well. It's kind of like where we sit. At this point, Con Ed, and folks could Google this, is all in with respect to our clean energy commitment. That's an easy Google, right? And it lays out the things that we're thinking about with respect to all aspects of the business. Driven, and the focus of it is probably on the energy efficiency side, but not exclusive. So we're thinking about what happens on our transmission side, what happens on the distribution side, what happens on our procurement side. How does this company that 14, 15,000 odd people, and all of the things that we bring to bear in the city of New York and Westchester County, and how do we do that in a way that is really in step and in line with all of the policy things that we hear coming down the pike from Rory, but not just, at this point, we understand, we get the policy, but the leadership of the organization, I don't think I'll be contradicted on this, has really fully embraced the notion of decarbonization, the notion of electrification, the notion of energy efficiency, And we are working at this point with all partners, whether they be individuals, commercial, corporations, Bomee, and her startups, right? Everybody's part of this, exciting new future. So let me just pause there.
Did I just get my own category? That's amazing.
Tech startups are important.
So that's great. It's so nice to see so many of you in person. Obviously I don't know who's online, but like a lot of the folks who are in the room are folks who are active in our community of practice. And I think I just want to start out by saying that, first of all, it's really clear nobody knows what we're doing. So let me just talk about that a little bit. Our company is called Cadence OneFive, and it was founded by me. I'm a houser. I'm a trained urban planner who's focused on affordable housing for the past 20 years, ish. And my co-founder is Mark Zuluaga, who is the former CEO of Stephen Winter Associates. Stephen Winter Associates is a consulting mechanical engineer. It's very active in the Northeast. Very much part of the policymaking as a technical service provider and a trusted advisor to governments in New York. And so, the two of us, Mark and I, are the thing that really brought us together is essentially we're kind of like suckers for doing things at scale. That's why Stephen Winter Associates has been so very much involved in being a technical resource to policymaking, and also why my personal career trajectory has been what it's been, which is that enterprise, we work with governments to design programs that affect all of the affordable housing in New York, including things like helping to get a standard set for the affordable housing funding. And just the flywheel effect of that is, first of all, when we did that, I thought at the time that it was a low bar. And I thought that it was a low bar because so many of the things that are in the Green Communities criteria at the time, which is a national standard, a lot of those things were fulfilled simply by the fact that you were working on affordable housing in New York City. And so I was like, we really should be pushing for something much, much more ambitious. Like I was like, we should make passive house, the thing. And I believed that for a long time, that we had set the bar low, and then I was surprised by what happened afterward. And folks who are more directly involved in affordable housing, new construction right now will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my impression that most, if not all, of the new construction affordable housing in New York is now passive house. And that was without making it a competitive criteria, and that was without making it a requirement. And I think that what that story conveyed to me is just the power of just slightly changing the context of what you're doing, and the fact that you can have such incredible sort of compounding effects from these relatively modest directional changes. And I think that as we go into this moment where we're really at the beginning of a dramatic, certainly a dramatic need to ramp up construction activity, right? So across the country, something like only 2% of homes receive renovations that have an effect on their energy consumption, right? Beneficial effect on the energy consumption. And that number basically hasn't changed for years and years and years and years and years. And we're in a moment where really, if you without even talking about the numbers per se, when you look at what's going on, we have two things happening at the same time. We have an impending need to do more construction, because we will now have to we will have to use buildings to better protect residents from the impacts of climate change that are already unavoidable. So there is construction that is sort of climate adaptive in nature that we know we will have to do, just like when we started passing codes for stricter earthquake resiliency or whatever, that generated construction activity. We're heading into the same kind of uptick in construction because of safety considerations that we'll have to retrofit for. The other thing that is sort of compounding that is the fact that across the country, something like a third of all of the housing is reported to have housing quality deficits, and something like 40% of those that are reporting the housing quality deficits are talking about things that have to do with not controlling bulk water and moisture, so things like mold and mildew, like that's what's being reported. And what's happening, right, on the physical building is there's water in that building somewhere it's not supposed to be. Right? And another 40% of the folks who, of that third of the housing that have quality issues are reporting structural issues. Right? So these are not minor considerations. What we're talking about is that we have a acknowledged crisis of affordability in the country. We also have this crisis of housing quality in this country. There's lots of structural reasons why that may be true, but that's in fact what we're looking at as we're heading into now dealing with essentially unavoidable climate change impacts as essentially impending health crises that we have to use buildings to protect people from. And so, from a perspective of this conversation around efficiency, electrification, and affordability, to me, that is sort of a bubble around that would be talking about housing quality. So because I'm a houser, when I talk about buildings, I'm really talking about housing. That's where we spend a huge percentage of our time as people. That's where that's our home, that's where we have our families, that's where we sleep. Right? And so when we think about buildings, to me, I think about, well, there's a big public conversation that we need to engage in around housing quality because of the fact that even though when we look at it from the context of utility policy making, we think of housing or buildings as being like, oh, those are things that create demand, those are things that consume. Really, what we're talking about is the first job of the structure is to protect the people who are in there, right? We have affordable housing standards came out of a health movement originally in this country. And we're again in a moment where affordable housing and housing in general is really gonna have to be thought of in this sort of very health and safety first and protective kind of context. And so what we're doing at Cadence is we're taking that kind of thinking about the role of buildings and what will need to happen in the future, in the relative near future, with ramping up construction. And we're trying to use technology to support the ecosystem of service providers and all of the work that we do as practitioners in the built environment. And so just think of, I know Rory gave us a close-eye moment. So think about it this way. Let's say we had a cultural custom that when we walk from point A to point B, we have to take 3 steps and then 1 step to the left. Like, you're not allowed to just walk 4 steps straight. We have a cultural custom, a norm that says you walk 3 steps and then you have to take 2 steps to the left. And the solutions that people come up with, let's say, is we're gonna make that long walk really comfortable. We're gonna make some really comfortable sneakers for you. And that's sort of like the hard tech solution. So we're gonna make your walk nicer by giving you better hardware. So you take the 3 steps, take 1 to the left. Well, what we're trying to say is, why do we have this cultural, why do we have this expectation that you can only take 3 steps before you take a step to the left? Are there ways to help, make the decision-making different so that maybe, you can take more than 3 steps before you take a step to the left, and we'll just make the walk shorter, right? So conceptually, what we're trying to do is not so much like on the technology end of here is a solution that you can now apply across, on the building. Like that's I think that approach is amazing, and certainly whether you're talking about delivery methods, so like we have a lot of more sort of design build type solutions where somebody's saying, you come to me and I will give you a full solution. We'll take all of the uncertainty and internalize it as a service, whether it's that kind of tech delivery, or whether you're talking about hard technology like modular construction and like new kinds of HVAC equipment, whatever. That's all wonderful, but underlying all of that is that we have certain things that we do in doing construction in buildings that we can just do better, and we can take software solutions and apply that.
Yes, please.
Not add, but comment. I was listening to both Bomee and Sadie, pioneer the various matters of specialty. What struck me was that when you have challenging problems, right, working with folks that have that breadth and depth of knowledge is really key. I won't say how long we've known each other on this panel. I don't want to embarrass us. I'm the only one who has the gray hair still. But really,
I have gray hair.
really, as we go into what will be undoubtedly some challenging times, right, as we execute. Ultimately, remember something you said, I think, in our prep meeting. Stuff has to get built, right? It has to get done. It has to get constructed at some point. And really understanding the landscape and working with partners that have that breadth and depth of knowledge in this subject is going to be key to get it to a decarbonized future.
I think it's also just orientation. So affordable housing has been an incubator for efficiency, energy efficiency and sustainability because everything we do is hard. You don't just go out and finance or build or develop affordable housing because it's easy. You do it because you care. Otherwise, you'd just be building market rate, right? You'd just be throwing up housing everywhere and charging the highest rent you could because all you cared about was the bottom line of your investors. But we are oriented to take on the hardest deals, the smallest deals, the ones that have the most challenging economics, the most difficult locations, with the most difficult populations. We're trying to house the homeless. I mean, so we're used to things being difficult. So it's kind of like bring it on. We can make it better. We can make it more resilient. We can make it more energy efficient. How can we do that? And we apply that same problem-solving mindset of, how can we do this better as it relates to sustainability. And you start as a houser, you develop an interest, and you go try to solve it one way. We're a capital provider. We're trying to use capital to solve it in another way, bringing sustainability in. And I'll just say one thing that's different about CPC from most lenders. We have a sustainability team at CPC that we've had in place since 2008 that looks at every deal that we do and says, how do we make this more energy efficient? How do we make this building higher performance? How do we teach our underwriters how to underwrite it? How do we educate our government partners how to recognize the underwriting in it? How do we help our investors see why it's important? We're a carbon neutral company, definitely scope 1 and 2, sometimes scope 3. But we really need to push into that scope 3 and bring all of the people that provide that ability for us to do the hard deals, that same level of understanding and education around how to do what they do at that same level by bringing sustainability forward, making it an institutional understanding. So it's not just my mighty, intrepid sustainability team that does this. It's every loan officer. It's our credit team. It's our asset management teams. It's our CEO. I mean, we are greening every job at CPC, and that's what's important. I don't need new jobs that are green. I need my existing jobs to be green. So I'll pause there.
No, that's great. So I'm hearing so many great things. We need a community of thought leaders. Our goal is to transform really all businesses to be doing this and integrate it into their business. We got to change the way we do business. It's not just technology solutions. It's really the way we think about things. You talked also, Sadie, about partnerships of people who have traditionally been siloed, like NYSERDA and HCR, like how do we get housing and energy people to be a team, and construction too, as well as the finance people. So thinking about the world of policy and programs, and now we have all of this funding coming in, how can policymakers help achieve all of those things? Like, what is the additional infrastructure, incentives, drivers that will help all of you guys do the things that you're talking about and get to that transformative end result?
I would just love to give a plug for the work that is currently going on at the New York City Housing Authority. So the New York City Housing Authority, with the programs at the New York City Housing Authority that I inherited were Rory's programs. And so I started out with an $18 million energy efficiency capital program when I got to NYCHA. NYCHA currently has literal more than $1 billion program on that explicitly is focused on carbon performance, but what may not be, and that's, you see things like the partnership that NYCHA has with NYSERDA to bring forward a window installable heat pump, a unitized heat pump, which is be transformative for the multifamily sector. So you see it in that kind of way. The other thing that may not be as obvious is that there is just like Sadie was saying, that every deal that comes to the CPC gets asked these questions about performance, for example, every RAD deal that goes to the NYCHA real estate team gets asked these very aggressive questions about what are you doing on carbon performance, right? And every capital project that comes through the capital program at NYCHA gets asked the question of how does this affect the agency's overall carbon goals? And so, and I say that because the reason why it was really important for NYCHA to become aggressive in this way, and they're kind of, I feel like, relatively quiet about it, given the size of what they're doing. But the reason why it's important that they do it is because when you have a customer who is of a scale like NYCHA, you're able to help drive change in the market. And that's the explicit goal of the window air source heat pump program, for example. But that's also, what happens in all of the work that NYCHA does. When NYCHA, because it's such a big entity, when they change the way they do something, it has ripple effects in the market. It's the same thing with the rest of the city of New York. When DCAS decides to do something differently, it has ripple effects on, on the rest of the market. So, allowing government to take risks in that way is really important, because I do think that it's, I think that from one perspective, you're like, well, advocates have been pushing government agencies to adopt these things, and that's wonderful, but it is a risk, right, for when governments take these sorts of positions.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, when I think about policy, the first thing that comes, it's not really policy, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the building code. I like to say change the code and change the world. But that means you need a consistent building code. And so then that takes my policy mind to alignment. And we have lots of different departments of government doing really good things for really good reasons, but they're not always aligned. And unless we can align our departments of governments and our programs, they just cause conflict and frustration for those of us that are in the markets trying to enable that change to happen. So, you referenced the NYSERDA and HCR sort of tension initially. NYSERDA had their money, HCR had their money. HCR did affordable housing, NYSERDA did energy efficiency. Well, you want buildings to be more energy efficient, so why do they have to go to NYSERDA to get that money? Affordable housing already has enough legal documents, it has enough lawyers, it has enough people at the table trying to do those deals, and so just get NYSERDA to allocate some of that ratepayer money over here to HCR. And what HCR did on the policy side most recently was change their QAP for their new builds, their new construction projects, to be all electric.
QAP being?
QAP, the Qualified Action Plan, which is where a developer comes in and makes an application to receive tax credits to build affordable housing. Those tax credits enable that to happen. And it used to be, you'd build one of those buildings and you'd hook it up to fossil fuel. And now you build one of those buildings and you hook it up to electricity. That's a big change for a business and an ecosystem of developers that's never had to do that before. So they railed against it initially. But when the Qualified Action Plan changed and the rules changed and they had to do it, they did. And they did it because, thank you, Con Edison, there was a gas moratorium in Lower Westchester before this change happened. And so developers that were developing that banged into the moratorium had to do electric. And so we had these early adopters because of the gas ban or the moratorium. Sorry, did I say gas ban? Wishful thinking. And they did it, all right? And so that then showed other developers it can be done. Moreover, it showed the state you can change the QAP to require it because this is a sophisticated industry of people that can figure it out. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for being able to figure this stuff out, but we really can and we do, right? We solve so many problems in this country, right? And, one thing that really bugs me is like a problem that we solved was now I don't have to take my little tag out of my wallet when I walk into the building to swipe through the security. I just have it on my iPhone. Really, I don't have an iPhone, by the way, I have a BlackBerry, but people just have it on their device now. God forbid they have to reach into their pocket. Okay, problem solved, this is great. Not really. Like, can we solve the bigger problems, please? Can we? We really need to come together, which is why I love that Bomee's gone off to solve problems with her lens, which is different from my lens, but we're in the same space and we're all driving towards the same things. And then that then informs policy, and then we can get involved on the board of NYSERDA or HFA or NYSEG or whatever it is, and inform them as to how to change what they're doing to affect and impact, in our case, buildings more broadly. So.
Yeah, I would only add that I agree completely with Sadie. From where I sit, straddling or having a view to what's happening in the policy arena, to some of the technology pieces, to then having to go and do it right. In some cases, someone has to dig up that street, someone has to install the EV charger, someone has to have the treatment in the building, and I think Sadie's point around alignment, I think, should not be lost on us at all. There's a lot of folks, a lot of very smart people doing a lot of good work, but in some cases, not fully aligned and going down the same pathway together. And I think that's key for us to become that force multiplier that really allows us to take the next sets of steps to get to these very ambitious goals.
Sure.
I would just want to add one more comment. Like, I'm going to put my owner hat on for a second. So, codes obviously set the floor on what you're allowed to do, and then other kinds of standards motivate you, right? I think that there are two other things that New York has done that's really important. One is through Local Law 97, New York City set a price on carbon emissions, right, in the building sector. So, so you can now actually compare what is the financial impact of doing a thing that costs money, and what is the financial impact of not doing a thing, right? Because that still is going to cost money. So I think that really was very, it was a real dramatic shift in what owners are asked to consider. The other aspect, I think, is just, whether you're responding to changing codes, or whether you're responding to these sort of this regulatory changes or changes in market conditions or in incentives or whatever, the thing that allows you to do something at scale across the market is standardization. And we have been doing this for a long time in New York. We have plenty of experience upon which we can say, we have standardized practices. We can actually now make things streamlined because we have the standardized practices. But some of the things that we do are kind of from a different era when we're still figuring things out one project at a time. And so I think part of, and this is what, obviously what we're doing in our company, but part of what we're trying to push to see, like, we're having a conversation around climate, what are we going to be seeing, next year, the year after that. The change that we want to see is that we acknowledge the standardization that we can do, and we really focus on scale, so that we're actually doing the things that we know how to do off the shelf, and we're really putting the emphasis on that and perhaps putting less time into just looking for, the amazing case study.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, we've got to get to there's a lot of questions, and keep them coming. I just want to elevate the point you just said, that having a compliance obligation just focuses the mind, and there are lots of things like energy efficiency already makes economic sense. People aren't doing it, so how can we use policy to focus the mind? And I want to jump off of your codes comment, Sadie, because we did have a question about the codes and standards legislation that passed in New York last year, and whether that is going to lead to an all-electric code in New York. And I think we don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on whether that will happen and whether it should happen. Would that be a helpful signal to focus the mind?
So let me just say tangentially, looking at those codes, but I do think that it is certainly heading in that direction. I think the latest sets of codes do set us up for the standard becoming near electric, but left to be seen. Just a quick comment on that.
Yeah, I can't speak to whether or not that is going to happen, but I do want to talk about some other code issues or compliance issues that people fall in line with, that I see as somewhat analogous to what we're up against with Local Law 97 and electrification, but it's kind of an unfair analogy too. So Local Law 11, you walk around New York City, all you see is scaffolding. because local law 11 requires an owner to replace and repair their facade on a regular basis because somebody got injured when a brick or something fell off a parapet and hurt a person. And that's important, and it's important that we keep people safe. There are no incentives for local law 11. There are no programs for local law 11. It gets done because it's part of what you have to do as a business owner, as a building owner. It's business as usual. ADA compliance is another one. A lot of old buildings in New York City. HPD took a housing preservation development, the city's housing agency, took a stand and said, all the buildings we put money into have to be ADA compliant. That's expensive to do. There were no incentives for that program. There were no loan programs. People did it because it was the right thing to do, to Bomee's point, to protect the people that live there, right? And so it's now business as usual. You don't design a building, you don't build a building unless it's ADA compliant. They're smaller examples, but they get to the point of this needs to become business as usual. Of course, we can't just change the code immediately today because we don't have the grid to support an all-electric built environment, certainly in the city or the state, and so we need that to be a transition. And I really applaud, I want to shout out NYSERDA for this because they've taken the time to really look at what that transition looks like with an electrification roadmap and a decarbonization roadmap. I am pushing them hard for a cartoon version of that roadmap because I'm not sure how many people will read a very technical roadmap, but the thinking is there. So then distilling that thinking, keeping it simple, and pushing it out to the practitioners in a way that we can scale, I think is the work that we all need to do next, with keeping that in mind that this must become business as usual.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift gears a bit and ask an audience question about workforce. And Gregory, I want to start with you and just thinking about your own workforce. You know, I think of you guys are a combined gas and electric utilities, so, you know, your gas workforce can become your electric heat pump workforce, but do you think about it that way? Do they think about it that way? There's a lot of concern that we've all heard, especially from the gas industry that has not embraced electrification and doesn't see a future for itself in this world. You know, how do you think about the conversation with the existing workforce that we have and the future workforce that we need? You know, how much can those be the same people?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I do think that there is some fungibility there, and let me I guess go down two tracks. First track being looking at the job requirements for energy efficiency. Let's call it pure play energy efficiency today, and what we've done. Not sure if any audience members here are part of our Energy Academy, but since 2019, Con Ed has stood up with partners, NYSERDA and some of our vendors, a very detailed program designed to produce the types of workers that we need today, meaning from an energy auditor, someone that could understand some of the financing pieces. And we've placed close to 100 folks in various types of companies as we sit here today. On the second track, I think that I'll talk about is the Utility Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act. Anybody familiar? Raise your hands. Okay. Right.
It's a self-selecting audience.
Self-selecting audience. Everybody knows what that is. I think that is going to additionally ramp up our thoughts around can we use some of that gas workforce, for example, right? That is already trained with respect to putting pipes in the ground, and how do we transition them into what becomes the jobs of the future? As we sit here today, that exists largely in legislation, but there are some compliance requirements that we're going to put forward. And we are spending some time thinking about exactly how that happens.
Yeah, we'll get some pilots for
that.
Right,
exactly,
so
right? We'll put some pilots out, we'll see how it works, and the job component is a very critical part of what we'll put out publicly.
And can I just stick with you, Gregory, but I want you guys to pipe in on this too. How are you thinking about the transition? There's a question about window heat pumps or mini splits. A lot of us got mini splits for air conditioning efficiency. It's so wonderful that electric heat comes with air conditioning for people who need that. Are mini splits sort of a cheap and easy way to get this into people's homes more quickly, and then, versus larger transitions where you're really putting a whole, building systems infrastructure into a new building to getting to all electric? How much are we going to still need the gas system even as a backup? And then, of course, really, I think under any of those transition scenarios, gas consumption is going to be going down, 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 down. So how are we managing and getting in front of that death spiral and what it could mean for the customers who are left on the gas system, who could be holding the bag of all of the stranded assets? So there's a lot packed into that question, yes. But I would just love all of your thinking about just how you visualize the transition.
So I guess let me start with the easy pathway to electrification, or the easier pathway. What we've seen with our programs thus far is that the mini split type of interventions, particularly for residential homes, have taken off, have resonated with customers, are not unfamiliar to a lot of our global customers. So many splits is not uncommon in many parts of Asia, the Caribbean, et cetera, et cetera. So that has really taken off, and we see that as a good pathway to begin that journey to electrification and decarbonization. Multifamily buildings, a challenge. I think for this self-selecting audience, that is clear, right? How do you then have a system like this, right, which is clearly central in some sort, right? How do you begin to think about electrification? Can that building be electrified? And I guess to the final part of your question, if this system then remains on gas, how and what type of system needs to be maintained for, let's say, 10 customers that remain on gas forever? I think these are things that are engaging a lot of conversation. I don't want to make a controversial or lightning rod statement here today, be quoted on it, but a lot of conversation happening around that becomes part of the hard problems to solve, but ones that we certainly need to dive into and begin. What does that pathway look like?
Yeah, for sure. And I should have mentioned in the beginning, the other thing that we have going in New York, in addition to our the legal mandates that we have, is the proceedings that are under the Public Service Commission's auspices for planning the gas transition and for complying with the climate legislation. So that's one of the main venues where that conversation's happening.
Yes, it will play out.
You guys should please pipe in on this.
I just want to jump in terms of a transition and what you point out with respect to people being left behind and having to carry the cost of the gas grid when everyone else is on electrification. And that's a big issue as it relates to environmental justice. And so that 40% really focuses on trying to prevent that from happening. And I think of it as we can either, it's just about money, right? Somebody has to pay for it. At the end of the day, it's just how and when do we pay for it? We can invest up front and do it in a way that's equitable and that's just, and we could do it in a way that creates jobs, and we can focus on LMI and disadvantaged communities. We can really invest, and that will benefit those communities tremendously. Or we can ignore those communities or not invest as much, and then in 15 years, when everybody else is on electricity and the cost of that has come down because of economies of scale, we can subsidize the people that are left on the grid. And I think that will be a lot more expensive and it's just not the best use of our capital. And I think about it, another analogy, something that I think about a lot, is the Community Reinvestment Act, which drove a lot of investment into distressed neighborhoods. It required banks to invest in distressed neighborhoods, which was a great thing. So, and it has transformed a lot of urban centers, and it has caused the entire capital and banking community to consider poverty and distress in neighborhoods in the work that they do. It's part of what they have to do. Okay, so enter climate into that conversation. Well, we're not going to get a Climate Reinvestment Act or Climate Investment Act, which some of us really wanted, because you can't get that through our dysfunctional government right now. But you can look at CRA and say, how do we incorporate climate? Well, the first thing people said was, let's give banks CRA credit for investing after a storm has occurred, which is great. So after Sandy, all these banks wanted to work with CPC because they got CRA credit for helping put money back into communities that had been devastated by a storm. And this is across the country. Well, why don't you get CRA credit for investing in the prevention, in carbon reduction and energy efficiency and resiliency and all of the things that will help us prevent those problems from happening? And so it's a mindset change. And if we're going to transition, again, it's like this becoming business as usual. Let's look at all of the elements of our government decisions and systems and all of the things that we do and just try to change them, reorient them. Because when you say that to someone who's a CRA person, they say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They just went through the whole, they're taking comments now on how to change the CRA. And when you introduce that to all the people on the phone talking about the things they want to change about the Section 8 or the this or the neighborhoods that are eligible. Well, what about climate? And you say this, well, yeah, that makes sense. We should probably put that in there. So it's not that people are against it. They just don't think about it because we're not oriented to thinking about addressing climate in the work we do every day. So I'll pause there.
And I just want to glom on to that thought because, I mean, to me, it's like every job in the built environment sector, like every construction job, every architecture and engineering job, if you touch a building, those are all climate jobs, right? So the person that I would love to most impress upon, I don't know that this kind of person is listening, but the person I would really love to have that awakening that they're in a climate job is the person who has the power to put a screw through the air barrier. That person, I would hope, understands that that is a climate decision that they're making when they're punching a hole through an air barrier that wasn't supposed to have a hole, right? And so every job in the construction sector is a climate job, right? And I think that, again, like, it's not, just to repeat what you just said, Sadie, it's not because you don't, if you're in one of those jobs and you're doing something the way that you have always done it, you're not doing that because you're taking malicious action. It's just you need a different, business as usual path to follow, right? And that's where, we can say, look, we have a whole bunch of models for what the new business as usual path ought to be. Let's just make it easy for people to do the new right thing. What you were doing before may have been the old right thing. We have a new right thing.
Great. So we have a lot of questions. We're going a little bit over time because there's so many questions, but this is fantastic. Thank you. We've got a lot of questions about the IRA and like when's the money coming and how's it all going to help us do everything better, quicker. So I'd love your thinking on that. We touched on it a little bit. Also with the building quality and just the home quality of life issues, we always struggle with, here's a building that is substandard and we can't even go in there and do energy efficiency, much less electrification because it's full of mold, the roof needs to be repaired. Can some of the IRA money help us with that? And in your thinking or in your comments on that, because everyone has access to that money, there's a great comment in here that like, we're all the converted, this is the self-selecting group where everybody wants an EV and a solar panel and they know what a thermal utility is. So what about the rest of the world? I mean, how can we be talking like every job is a climate job, not in a state where you can't say the word climate, but it's true. So everybody wants to live in quality housing. Everybody who doesn't have it wants air conditioning. Everybody wants jobs. Like, how can we talk about all of the benefits that we can be bringing to people and communities in a way that resonates outside New York, or by showing what we can deliver to people in what we do with these resources?
So I'll jump in on the IRA because I've been very involved in lots of conversations with people trying to figure out how to get that money out. And I'm going to focus specifically on $27 billion that is to come to not-for-profit lenders for greenhouse gas reduction. So broadly, the Inflation Reduction Act includes a whole bunch, $369 billion or so for climate. And the caveat for that money is it needs to address greenhouse gas reduction. So that's the big thing. And I think there's two gems in here. The money, $27 billion is a huge gem. But buried somewhere in the IRA, carbon is listed as a pollutant. And so you can get people to change their buildings in two ways, really. You can regulate them and tell them they have to do it, or you can incent them to do it, right? And so, in the capital markets, incentive comes in the form of the best interest rate, right? And so when you go out to borrow money, you don't borrow money at 8% if you can get money at 4%. Duh, you go borrow money at 4%. So what the IRA does, I think, is it gives not-for-profit, existing not-for-profit lenders who are mission-based, particularly oriented towards investing in disadvantaged communities, a tool to buy their interest rates down, to create a bright, shiny object for building owners that are looking to borrow capital to want to grab for a lower interest rate and better capital, particularly on this very important day where the Fed is going to increase rates yet again. So if you can drive down the cost of the capital that people borrow to do work at their building and say, okay, you can do all these other things, but you also have to address greenhouse gas, then you can start to move the needle on that becoming business as usual through the capital markets. The key to that is leverage. So let's say I at CPC take down $10 billion of this money. I'm not going to, but some large sum. I'm not going to just give it to people as grants. I'm going to go to the capital markets and say, I want to juice your products. I want to make your products better so that all those borrowers that you have that don't think about this at all, the unconverted, are reaching for the bright, shiny object of the cheap debt and addressing climate because, oh, now I have an opportunity to do it. For those of us in affordable housing, we see it as a tool that can help us do what we're already doing. But market transformation is trying to get the people that have no idea that they're actually doing it to do it. And that's the key, I think, that the other gem about the IRA. Calling carbon a pollutant can also sneak into the phase 1 site assessment on any building that you finance, and cause carbon to be addressed like asbestos is addressed with ASTM standards, or radon mitigation is addressed. You can't borrow money unless you address the pollutants in your building, remediate them, or have a plan for mitigation. If we could do that with carbon, and banks said, well, we can't close until you address that, you can move the needle.
That's incredible. Yeah. I think just in terms of when is the, it's a, sort of two framing comments on the when is the money coming, right? So I think it's fair to say that the incentives that are going to be accessible earlier are the ones that are targeted towards technology that we have on the shelf today.
Yeah, your heat pump rebate.
Right. The other side, the block grants that where states have to be more thoughtful in putting their plan together. I think that's actually where we have an opportunity to address the issue that you were raising about the underlying building quality and sort of the existing conditions, because states will have an opportunity to program that funding in conjunction with, for example, their housing programs or whatever. And I think that part of what the advocacy community could really help with is, both here in New York, where I think this is a pretty well-established idea, but also in other places, really emphasize the fact that the building is a building. There's not a chunk of the building this is the energy piece of the building, and then here's the rest of the building. It is literally a single thing. It is an integrated thing. And you need to, even though the funding sources may have specific purposes that cause you to look at it through the lens of, well, I got to bifurcate like things that can bring in incentives versus things that don't have specific incentives, even though the programs may ask you to do that, the underlying idea that the public policy should embrace really is that what I have is an asset that needs to be upgraded. And I have multiple sources of money for achieving that. And that's the way that, that's really, I don't know whether this is a new idea for the market rate folks, but this is the way that affordable housers think about things, right? I have an asset that needs to be upgraded to certain standards. Where are all the sources of money that I can do this with?
All right, Gregory, you're going to get the last word.
Yep, super quick. Not much more to add. My esteemed colleagues here have made all the great points. I think latching on to one of the points you made in the frame up, right? We have a self-selecting audience here that we're preaching to the choir. But then, what is that mass but customized message that we all take away, right? Ron's message is not Pedro's message, is not Donna's message. So what is that message that we take back? So let's just say next year's meeting of this sort, we bring folks that are green into this message, right? We get that out so that we could get that pathway where we spread the message broadly, right? Folks understand what needs to be done, and And then whether in small or large ways, right? Because some folks are going to be able to tackle a building, some folks are going to be able to tackle a light bulb. So how do we, what is that mass customized message, right? Tailored for everyone that we need to drive this needle forward. That's all I want.
Do you want to get the last word, Sadie? Okay. Well, thank you so much, all of you. That was really wonderful, and thanks for all the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. If you're in the room, you're invited for lunch, so please stay. And if you're virtual, sorry, no lunch for you, but thanks for coming. And there's great resources there, so please make use of them.